Introduction. The journey. No one escapes. There is a moment waiting for every human being when the world will loosen its hold. The room may be quiet or filled with voices. The body may surrender slowly after years of illness, or the final breath may arrive without warning. The heart will complete its last rhythm. The lungs will fall still. The hands that carried, built, defended, touched, and trembled will no longer answer the will. A life once crowded with urgency will close around a single irreversible fact. The person who entered the world through birth has reached the threshold called death. Everything familiar will remain on this side. The bed, the window, the unfinished book, the clothing folded in a drawer. The people gathered nearby, still calling the soul by the name it wore in life. The world will continue with astonishing indifference. Morning will arrive. Traffic will move. Trees will bend in the wind. Somewhere, another child will take its first breath, while another body releases its last. Yet for the one crossing, the oldest mystery will no longer be philosophical. It will become immediate. What remains when the body can no longer carry us? Religions have answered this question with heavens, judgments, resurrections, ancestral realms, purifying fires, divine courts, rebirth, dissolution, and eternal return. Mystics have spoken of radiant beings, tunnels of light, vast intelligence, indescribable love, terrifying emptiness, and realms more vivid than the physical world. Materialism offers a different answer. The brain stops, the mind ends, and the person disappears into the same silence from which all biological life emerged. Each position claims a form of certainty. None has removed the mystery. The ancient Gnostics approached death with a severity that modern spirituality often avoids. They did not assume that the end of the body automatically revealed the highest truth. They did not imagine that every celestial authority was ultimate merely because it appeared powerful, luminous, or holy. Their cosmologies described worlds layered within worlds, heavens governed by rulers, powers of fate, veils of forgetfulness, and a divine element within the human being that did not originate in the visible order. To them, the greatest danger was not simply death. It was ignorance carried through death. A person could leave the body and remain bound to fear. Consciousness could abandon flesh without abandoning obedience. The soul could encounter splendor and mistake magnificence for truth. It could be drawn by guilt, memory, desire, religious expectation, or the unfinished gravity of a life it still believed itself to be. The prison did not necessarily end because the walls became invisible. This is the disturbing possibility at the center of this book. Death does not automatically free consciousness from the forces that governed it in life. If fear directs us now, why should physical death immediately make us fearless? If we surrender our discernment whenever authority speaks with confidence, why should we suddenly become sovereign in an unfamiliar realm? If guilt has taught us to seek punishment, if shame has convinced us that suffering is deserved, if longing has bound us to what we cannot release, then the death of the body may remove the stage without ending the drama. The personality may no longer have a mouth, yet its habits could still speak. Memory may no longer depend upon a brain in any form we understand, yet consciousness may still organize itself around what it loved, feared, resisted, worshipped, and could not forgive. This does not mean that death is a trap. It does not mean that every light is false, every guide deceptive, every ancestor an illusion, or every invitation to return a scheme of cosmic imprisonment. Fear-based spiritual systems often claim to liberate the soul while quietly building another chamber around it. They replace one unquestioned doctrine with another. They tell the seeker not to trust the church, the world, the heavens, the dead, the light, or even love itself, until suspicion becomes the new god. Paranoia is not gnosis. Reflexive rejection is not sovereignty. A soul that fears deception at every threshold is still being governed by fear. It remains reactive, and whatever can provoke reaction can still direct it. The purpose of this book is therefore not to instruct the reader to wage war against the afterlife. It is not to provide imaginary passwords for celestial gates, or to claim certainty about regions no living language can adequately describe. It is to examine the architecture of consciousness so deeply that the reader begins to recognize what can be manipulated, what can be released, and what within us may be incapable of captivity. The Gnostic journey is not founded upon blind belief. Its central movement is remembrance. Beneath the conditioned personality, beneath the names, roles, wounds, ambitions, and inherited images of God, the Gnostics perceived a divine spark, a presence belonging to a reality older than the systems that surround it. This spark was not a reward granted by religious obedience. It was not created by moral perfection. It was not manufactured through spiritual achievement. It was already there, buried perhaps, forgotten certainly, but never entirely extinguished. The soul's deepest task was not to become divine. It was to remember the divine element it had mistaken for something distant. This distinction changes the meaning of death. If the human being is nothing more than the personality, then death appears as annihilation. If the human being is an immortal personality carrying the same desires forever, then death becomes an extension of the life already known. But if the personality is a temporary formation through which a deeper consciousness has moved, death may become a separation between what was borrowed and what was essential. The difficulty lies in the fact that borrowed things rarely feel borrowed while we possess them. The name feels like the self. The body feels like the self. The story feels like the self. The wounds feel intimate enough to become sacred. The beliefs inherited from family and culture feel like personal revelation. Even spiritual identity can become another costume stitched tightly to the soul. A person may spend years announcing that they have transcended ego while becoming fiercely attached to the image of being awakened. Death places every attachment under unbearable pressure. What cannot cross must be released. What refuses release may create the experience of being pulled backward. This is why the ancient command to die before death appears across so many mystical traditions. It does not call for physical destruction. It calls for the voluntary ending of false identification while the body still lives. To die before death is to discover that a role can fall away without destroying awareness. A belief can collapse without extinguishing being. A memory can be faced without becoming the ruler of the present. Fear can move through the body without receiving authority over the soul. Every conscious release becomes a rehearsal for the final crossing. Every moment of genuine stillness teaches us that awareness remains when the usual machinery of identity pauses. Every act of forgiveness loosens a chain. Every refusal to obey shame reduces the power of an inner judge. Every encounter with grief reveals whether love can survive without possession. Every surrender of certainty creates space for truth to appear without being forced into a familiar shape. The journey between lives, if such a journey exists, may not begin after death. It may already be unfolding beneath the surface of ordinary consciousness. We move between identities constantly. The child disappears into the adolescent. The adolescent becomes the adult. The believer becomes the skeptic. The wounded person becomes the healer. Or the healer secretly remains the wounded person beneath a more admired name. A single lifetime contains many deaths, yet we resist each one as though continuity depended upon keeping every former self alive. The fear of death may therefore be inseparable from the fear of transformation. The personality asks, "Will I continue?" The soul may be asking a more dangerous question. What in me was ever truly alive? This book will move through several possible maps of the unseen. We will examine the Gnostic heavens and the rulers associated with fate. We will explore the Archons not as crude monsters hovering outside humanity, but as powers that may operate cosmologically, psychologically, socially, and spiritually. We will investigate the counterfeit spirit, the voice that imitates wisdom while keeping consciousness bound through accusation, urgency, pride, and fear. We will approach the controversial idea of the false light carefully. Light has symbolized truth across civilizations because it reveals what darkness conceals. Yet brightness alone cannot prove divinity. A radiant appearance may inspire trust before discernment has awakened. A being may speak with authority and still belong to a limited order. A vision may feel overwhelming and still be shaped by expectation, memory, culture, or the hidden needs of the psyche. Discernment asks more than, "Is this beautiful?" It asks, "What does this presence demand? Does it intensify fear? Does it require submission? Does it flatter spiritual importance? Does it condemn the soul into helplessness? Does it permit questioning? Does it lead toward greater clarity, compassion, freedom, and remembrance, or toward dependency upon another authority?" These questions matter in life before they matter in death. The voices that deceive us now rarely arrive wearing obvious darkness. They come dressed as duty, destiny, holiness, urgency, protection, and certainty. They tell us that surrendering our own capacity to know is the price of belonging. They call fear reverence. They call obedience love. They call exhaustion service. They call self-erasure virtue. A person trained to betray inner truth in life may not become discerning merely because the body is gone. We will also enter the mystery of reincarnation without reducing it to a comforting doctrine or a cosmic punishment system. The idea that consciousness returns through many lives has appeared in multiple traditions, but explanations differ profoundly. Some describe reincarnation as education. Others call it bondage. Some see karma as divine justice, while others understand it as momentum, unfinished patterns repeating because consciousness remains entangled with them. The question is not merely whether reincarnation happens. The deeper question is, what returns? Does the personality return, or only tendencies? Does memory survive, or does it dissolve into the greater life of the soul? Are suffering and circumstance chosen, imposed, inherited, generated, or woven from causes too complex for moral slogans? Does the soul consent to each life? Can consent be meaningful when memory is erased? Is Earth a school, a prison, a mirror, a sacred experiment, or all of these depending upon the condition of the consciousness experiencing it? Easy answers often protect us from the magnitude of the question. This book will not offer spiritual cruelty disguised as wisdom. It will not claim that every victim selected their suffering before birth, or that trauma proves a soul needed a lesson. Such explanations may preserve a tidy universe by sacrificing compassion. Mystery demands more humility than that. The same humility must guide any discussion of near-death experiences, life reviews, deceased relatives, guides, judges, and realms of light. These reports deserve attention, but not simplistic interpretation. They may reveal genuine dimensions of consciousness. They may also pass through the language, symbols, expectations, and neurological conditions of the individual. A Christian may encounter Jesus. A Hindu may encounter familiar deities. A secular person may describe an impersonal field of intelligence. The forms differ, yet certain patterns recur. Expanded awareness, separation from the body, panoramic memory, profound love, judgment, instruction, return. The existence of patterns does not eliminate the need for discernment. Neither does cultural variation erase the possibility that something real is being encountered through different symbolic languages. The unseen, if real, may be too vast to enter consciousness without clothing itself in forms the mind can recognize. The problem begins when the clothing is mistaken for the source. Gnostic wisdom repeatedly points beyond every image. Beyond the ruler is another order. Beyond the heavens is the Ogdoad. Beyond the Ogdoad are mysteries language cannot contain. Beyond every god who can be pictured, named, praised, feared, or enthroned is the unknowable source. The monad, the depth before division, the silence before the first word. The source does not compete for authority because nothing exists outside it. It does not need fear. It does not demand flattery. It does not become more infinite when worshipped, or less infinite when forgotten. The soul's return to source is therefore not a journey toward a jealous celestial monarch. It is the dissolution of everything that made separation appear absolute. Yet such language can become another abstraction unless it enters life. The reader may speak beautifully about the monad while remaining ruled by resentment. One may study the Archons while obeying every fearful thought. One may warn others about the false light while being seduced by attention, certainty, and spiritual superiority. Gnostic language does not guarantee Gnostic consciousness. Information is not liberation. A map is not a crossing. The true measure of this book will not be how many hidden systems the reader can describe by the final page. It will be whether fear has become more visible, whether inherited authority has lost some of its spell, whether the personality is held more lightly, whether death can be contemplated without either denial or obsession, whether the silence beneath thought has begun to feel less like emptiness and more like home. We are not preparing to defeat death. We are preparing to meet it without becoming unconscious. We are not learning to reject every presence at the threshold. We are learning not to surrender discernment merely because a presence shines. We are not seeking an escape from creation built upon hatred of the world. We are seeking freedom from the forces that make beauty into possession, suffering into identity, and incarnation into repetition. The body is not an enemy. It is the vessel through which this work becomes possible. Its mortality gives urgency to attention. Its limits expose attachment. Its vulnerability teaches compassion. Through the body, consciousness can observe fear, feel grief, release tension, speak truth, offer forgiveness, and practice the surrender it will one day be unable to postpone. Death preparation begins with learning how to live without constant flight from the present. The final ritual at the end of this book will gather these teachings into a contemplative act of remembrance. It will invite the reader to release names, identities, guilt, false authority, unfinished attachments, and fear. It will not pretend to control death. No ritual can force the mystery to obey. Its purpose is simpler and more profound, to help the soul recognize itself without the usual noise. Before we enter the planetary gates, the false light, reincarnation, the Ogdoad, and the return to source, we must begin with the nearest mystery. Not the heavens, not the Archons, not the afterlife. The self that believes it is reading these words. Who is afraid of death? Who wants to survive? Who seeks liberation? Who has carried your name through all the changes of your life? And when every answer falls silent, what remains to witness the silence? The journey between lives may lead through unimaginable worlds. It may pass through memory, radiance, judgment, longing, terror, and beauty beyond anything the senses have known. But the most important preparation does not begin in another realm. It begins here. Before the heart completes its final rhythm, before the world releases its claim upon the body, before the name you have carried becomes something spoken only by others, the gate is already open, and the first crossing is the one from unconscious identification into remembrance. Chapter 1. The moment the body ends. There is no rehearsal for the exact instant when the body becomes something the soul can no longer command. A hand that has answered thousands of intentions will remain still. The chest will no longer rise beneath the weight of breath. The familiar pressure of gravity, temperature, hunger, pain, and touch will either vanish or become irrelevant to whatever awareness remains. The body that once felt inseparable from identity will lie before others as an object of tenderness, grief, ritual, fear, or medical confirmation. Someone may close the eyes. Someone may speak the name again, softly this time, as though the person might still be near enough to hear it. The room will contain the same furniture. The clock will continue its small mechanical insistence. Light may fall through a window and rest upon the floor exactly as it did an hour earlier. Nothing in the visible world will announce that one of existence's greatest mysteries has opened. The silence after a final breath can be almost offensively ordinary. Yet something irreversible has occurred. A boundary that shaped every experience of a lifetime has failed. The body is still present, but the person is no longer available in the way the living understand presence. This is the moment that human beings have surrounded with candles, prayers, drums, bells, incense, sacred oils, whispered instructions, closed curtains, opened windows, washed hands, veiled mirrors, and stories of guides waiting beyond sight. Civilizations have disagreed about nearly everything death means, but few have treated it as a trivial event. Even those who believe consciousness ends with the brain often stand quietly before the dead, sensing that an absence has entered the room with a force no physical measurement can fully describe. The body has not disappeared. What has disappeared is its inhabitation. We know the difference immediately. A corpse can possess the same face, the same scars, the same hands, and the same biological material that belonged to the living person minutes earlier. Yet no one who loved that person mistakes the body for the whole of them. The distinction may not prove the survival of consciousness, but it reveals something profound about human recognition. We do not experience a person as flesh alone. We experience animation, intention, awareness, voice, memory, presence, and the mysterious inwardness that makes a face more than an arrangement of features. Death leaves the arrangement behind. The inwardness is what becomes uncertain. The last territory of the body, modern medicine, can describe the dying process with remarkable precision. Blood pressure falls, oxygen levels change, organs begin to fail. Electrical activity in the brain alters and eventually ceases according to the instruments used to detect it. Cells continue certain functions after the organism as a whole can no longer sustain life. Death, biologically considered, is not always a single event but a sequence of endings. The heart may stop before all cellular activity has ended. Brain function may be severely compromised while circulation is artificially maintained. The body may appear peaceful while internal systems are collapsing in waves. Language struggles because death does not always obey the dramatic clarity imagined by stories. There is not necessarily one clean line between life and non-life that can be witnessed without ambiguity. For the dying person, the experience may be quieter, stranger, or more inward than observers can know. The senses often withdraw unevenly. Vision may dim. The edges of the room may soften. Hearing may persist after other forms of response have faded. Time may lose its ordinary structure. A minute can become immense. An entire life may seem to gather itself near the surface of awareness. The dying may speak to people no one else can see, reach toward an unseen presence, or describe a place that does not exist within the room. Such moments are interpreted according to belief. One person calls them hallucinations produced by a failing brain. Another sees deceased relatives arriving to accompany the soul. A clinician may describe changes in cognition. A mystic may speak of the thinning of the veil. None of these explanations should be accepted merely because it comforts or frightens us. The honest position begins with attention. Something happens as the body loses its ability to organize ordinary consciousness. The dying person may become confused, lucid, fearful, serene, or astonishingly present. Some cling to life with visible force. Others seem to release themselves before the final breath. Some who have been unconscious suddenly open their eyes, speak with clarity, recognize loved ones, or say something that feels complete. Others withdraw without farewell. Death does not arrive in one emotional form. It does not reward the spiritually educated with perfect calm. It does not condemn the frightened as failures. Fear at the edge of death is not proof of spiritual ignorance. It is partly the body's ancient intelligence resisting dissolution. Every organism is shaped to continue. The heart accelerates under threat, muscles tense, breath changes. The nervous system does not calmly surrender merely because the mind has read books about impermanence. The body was made to survive. Its refusal to disappear should not be mistaken for the soul's deepest choice. This distinction matters because many spiritual systems judge the dying too quickly. They turn fear into evidence of insufficient faith. They imagine that a peaceful expression proves liberation and struggle proves attachment. But the body can fight even when the inward being is ready. Medication can soften visible distress without revealing what consciousness experiences. A serene face may conceal terror, and an agitated body may contain a soul already loosening its hold. No observer can know the entire crossing from the outside. We can only stand near the threshold. The person dying must enter it alone. The first separation. The earliest mystery of death is not where consciousness goes. It is whether consciousness experiences separation at all. Does awareness cease when the brain can no longer support it? Does it contract into darkness and vanish? Does it remain near the body, confused by the sudden loss of physical sensation? Does it expand beyond the familiar center of identity? Does the soul encounter a world that has always surrounded the visible one, but could not be perceived through ordinary senses? These questions cannot be settled by confidence alone. Traditions across the world have described an interval in which the dead remain close to the life they have left. They may hear mourning, witness their own body, attempt to communicate, or fail to understand that death has occurred. In some accounts, the soul separates immediately. In others, the process unfolds gradually, as though consciousness must release its bond with matter layer by layer. The ancient world rarely imagined death as a simple switch. Egyptian funerary texts described a complex journey through gates, names, judgments, and transformations. Tibetan teachings portrayed intermediate states in which consciousness encounters luminous and terrifying appearances. Greek mysteries spoke of rivers, guardians, memory, forgetting, and choices made before return. Gnostic texts described rulers, seals, powers, and ascents beyond the planetary heavens. These systems differ dramatically, yet they share an intuition. Physical death does not necessarily complete the spiritual journey. The end of the body may be the beginning of exposure. During life, identity is held together by repetition. We awaken to the same name, history, relationships, environment, and bodily sensations. The world continually confirms who we believe ourselves to be. Mirrors return the face. Other people remember the story. Documents preserve the name. Pain reminds us where the body ends. Desire directs attention outward. Routine maintains the illusion of continuity. Death removes these anchors. The soul, if it persists, may awaken into a condition where none of the usual confirmations remain. There may be no mirror, no familiar weight, no heartbeat, no room arranged around the body's location. The senses that once defined reality may no longer function. The personality may search for the structures that made it feel coherent. This could be liberation. It could also be disorientation. A person who has spent an entire life identifying with the body may not immediately recognize consciousness without it. A person who depended upon external authority may seek someone to explain what is happening. A person burdened by guilt may expect judgment and interpret any powerful presence as a judge. A person convinced that death leads to a particular heaven may clothe the unknown in familiar religious imagery. Consciousness does not approach mystery empty-handed. It arrives carrying expectation. The images encountered at death may therefore reveal more than an external realm. They may reveal the architecture through which the soul has learned to perceive. The name becomes distant. Consider what happens to the name at death. Throughout life, the name functions as a summons. Someone speaks it, and attention turns. The child learns that a particular sound refers to this body, this history, this position in the family. Over time, the name accumulates praise, blame, legal responsibility, affection, shame, achievement, and memory. It appears on certificates, bills, contracts, books, screens, hospital records, and eventually a grave or container of ashes. The name feels intimate because nearly every relationship has passed through it. Yet the name existed before the person understood it and will remain after the person no longer answers. It was given. This is true of much that we call the self. Language was given, religion was given, social identity was given, expectations were given, many fears were inherited before they were chosen. The body itself arrived through conditions no conscious personality arranged. The self that fears death is partly composed of structures it did not create. At the final threshold, these structures may begin to loosen. The name may still be spoken in the room, but whatever awareness remains may no longer feel contained by it. The dead may hear mourning as though it belongs to someone else. The life just completed may appear at a distance, vivid, emotionally charged, yet no longer identical with the one observing it. This possibility has appeared in mystical reports for centuries. The soul sees the life rather than merely remembering from within it. Events are not experienced as isolated scenes, but as patterns. The harm done to others may be felt directly. Love may appear not as sentiment, but as a force connecting lives. Moments once dismissed as insignificant may reveal consequences that the personality never understood. Whether such a review is literal, symbolic, psychological, or spiritual, it introduces a profound shift. The life becomes something witnessed. The identity that said, "This is me," becomes something awareness can observe. If this occurs, death may expose the difference between consciousness and biography. The biography has a beginning, sequence, and end. Consciousness may stand in relation to it. But the moment this distinction appears, another danger arises. The personality may attempt to reclaim ownership through judgment. It may say, "I was good, I was unforgivable, I failed, I deserve reward," or "I must return and repair everything." The life review may become revelation, but it may also become a gate through which guilt directs the soul. This is why death preparation cannot be reduced to memorizing doctrines. The soul must learn how to see truth without collapsing into condemnation. Truth reveals. Shame imprisons. The difference may determine whether memory becomes wisdom or gravity. What the living see. Those who remain beside the body experience another kind of threshold. They see the person and cannot reach them. Grief begins partly as the shock of failed access. The body is near, yet relationship has been interrupted. The living may touch the hand, speak aloud, apologize, promise, plead, or say what fear prevented them from saying earlier. Even when death was expected, the finality feels impossible because the nervous system continues to anticipate response. For days or weeks, the dead may appear in ordinary habits of perception. A sound resembles their footsteps. A familiar vehicle passes. The phone becomes a place where a message can no longer arrive. The mind prepares a sentence to tell them, then remembers. Grief is the slow education of the body in absence. Yet many mourners report another sensation. Not merely the absence of the dead, but a strange nearness. The room feels inhabited. A dream carries unusual clarity. A scent appears without source. A sudden warmth, pressure, inner voice, or unmistakable sense of presence interrupts ordinary thought. Some interpret these moments as communication. Others see them as the brain's attempt to preserve attachment. It is possible that both interpretations are sometimes too simple. Human perception is shaped by love, memory, expectation, and subtle cues. Grief can produce powerful experiences. But the fact that the mind participates in an experience does not automatically make the experience unreal. Every perception, including ordinary sight, is mediated through the mind. The deeper question is not whether interpretation occurs, but whether interpretation exhausts the event. We should neither exploit grief with certainty nor dismiss it with arrogance. The living do not know exactly where the dead have gone. The dead, if they remain conscious, may not immediately know either. This shared uncertainty creates a sacred responsibility. The dying should not be burdened by the terror of those who cannot release them. The dead should not be called back through desperate possession. Love may speak, bless and accompany, but it must also allow departure. To love someone at death is to stand near the gate without trying to become the gatekeeper. There are cultures that speak to the newly dead, telling them that the body has ended and they are free to continue. These instructions may be understood spiritually or psychologically. In either case, they recognize that transition can require clarity. You have died. The body is no longer suffering. You are loved. You may release us. Do not be afraid. Remember what is deepest in you. Such words do not control the crossing. They create an atmosphere of permission. The final gift the living can offer may be freedom from obligation. The violence of unfinishedness. Few lives feel complete when death arrives. There is another conversation that should have happened. Another apology. Another journey. Another year. A child still needs guidance. A partner still expects return. A manuscript remains unfinished. A resentment has not dissolved. A room contains plans built upon the assumption of more time. Death interrupts the sentence. This interruption may generate one of the strongest forces binding consciousness to the life it has left: unfinishedness. The soul may not be pulled backward by an external ruler. It may be pulled by its own refusal to accept incompletion. Human beings often imagine they will release life when the proper moment comes. Yet the proper moment rarely arrives according to the personality's schedule. Even a long life can end with desire intact. Completion is not guaranteed by age. Someone may die at 90, still waiting to become the person they intended to be. The unfinished life can exert tremendous gravity. A parent may remain attached to the child they fear cannot survive without them. A person wronged may cling to the demand for justice. A creator may feel bound to work that never reached the world. A betrayed lover may refuse to release the story. An addict may die still organized around the next craving. A devout believer may wait for the exact figure they were promised would appear. What we cannot release while living may become the landscape through which consciousness moves after death. This does not mean attachment is punished. It means attachment has direction. Every unresolved force points somewhere. Desire points toward the desired object. Guilt points toward punishment or repair. Fear points away from what threatens. Love mixed with possession points backward toward the beloved. Identity points toward whatever confirms it. The mind follows these directions automatically during life. Why assume the directions vanish when the body ends? The soul may enter the unseen with no feet, yet still move according to longing. This is one reason traditions have emphasized the final state of consciousness. Not because one frightened thought condemns a person, but because the accumulated orientation of a life may shape what awareness recognizes and follows. The last moment does not appear from nowhere. It gathers the life. The body as veil and teacher. Spiritual literature often treats the body as a prison, shell, garment, or temporary vehicle. These metaphors can reveal something true, but they can also become cruel. A person may begin despising the very form through which awakening must occur. The body limits consciousness, but limitation is not identical with evil. Through the body, we encounter resistance. We cannot be everywhere at once. We must choose. We become tired. We age. We are vulnerable to injury, rejection, illness, and loss. These conditions can generate fear and attachment, but they also make compassion possible. The body teaches consequence because actions occur in time and affect other bodies. Without limitation, courage would have no cost. Without mortality, attention could be postponed forever. The body makes love urgent because touch cannot be guaranteed tomorrow. The Gnostic critique of the material world has often been flattened into hatred of embodiment. Yet the deeper problem is not simply matter, it is unconscious identification with structures that claim to be ultimate. The body becomes a prison when consciousness believes nothing exists beyond it. Religion becomes a prison when an image of God claims to be the source itself. The mind becomes a prison when thought presents its own movement as the whole of awareness. The body can also become a temple of recognition. Breath reveals dependence and gift. Pain reveals where resistance lives. Pleasure reveals the seduction of repetition. Stillness reveals how much of identity is maintained through constant motion. Aging reveals that form is always leaving, even while life continues. The body rehearses death every day. Cells are shed. Memories alter. Faces change. Strength diminishes and returns. Sleep dissolves the world each night. The person who wakes is continuous with the one who slept, yet the interval remains mysterious. For hours, ordinary identity disappears or transforms into dream. We trust ourselves to sleep because we expect return. Death terrifies partly because return is uncertain. But sleep offers a clue. Consciousness already knows how to release the visible world. The difference is that the body remains alive to call us back. At death, the call may not come. The final breath is one of the oldest symbols of life because it stands at the border between voluntary and involuntary existence. We can hold it, deepen it, slow it, and direct attention through it. Yet we cannot permanently command it. The body breathes during sleep without consulting the personality. Fear changes breath before thought has fully interpreted the threat. Grief catches in the throat. Desire accelerates the chest. Calm lengthens exhalation. Breath reveals that life is happening through us as much as by us. The first breath begins participation in the world. The last breath releases it. Those present at death sometimes describe a pause after the final exhalation, as though the room itself is waiting. The body may make sounds, shift, or release tension. The face can change. What was strained may soften. What was animated becomes still. The silence afterward is unlike ordinary silence because everyone recognizes that something will not resume. The personality spent a lifetime planning the next moment. Death ends the next. If consciousness remains, it enters a condition without the body's familiar rhythm. There is no inhalation dividing one moment from another. No pulse measures duration. No hunger announces time. The soul may encounter an immense present. This could feel like peace. It could feel like endlessness. It could feel like exposure to everything the body once filtered. The senses are not merely windows, they are limits. Human eyes detect only a narrow range of light. Ears receive only certain frequencies. The brain excludes enormous amounts of information so that attention can function. If consciousness separates from these filters, perception may expand beyond anything the personality can easily organize. Mystics have described such expansion as union, radiance, terror, or overwhelming intelligence. The same vastness can be interpreted differently depending upon the condition of the one entering it. A consciousness trained in surrender may experience openness. A consciousness dependent upon control may experience annihilation. A consciousness saturated with guilt may populate vastness with judgment. A consciousness devoted to a sacred figure may recognize that figure within the light. The realm may be real, yet the form of encounter may still be shaped by the soul. The danger of immediate certainty. Human beings dislike open thresholds. We want death to mean something definite. We want assurance that loved ones continue, that justice is restored, that suffering has purpose, and that a benevolent intelligence waits beyond the body. Or we want the opposite certainty. Consciousness ends, nothing follows, and all metaphysical concern is unnecessary. Both certainties can protect us from vulnerability. To remain open before death is to admit that our most important question exceeds our control. This does not require abandoning reason. It requires refusing to confuse emotional need with knowledge. The afterlife market is full of confident maps. Some promise immediate heaven. Others warn of soul traps, deceptive lights, hostile entities, forced reincarnation, and cosmic harvesting. These claims can be compelling because they transform mystery into strategy. The reader is told what to expect, what to reject, what phrase to speak, and where not to go. But a map built from fear may train the soul to interpret every unknown presence as an enemy. A map built from comfort may train the soul to submit to the first beautiful appearance. Both can weaken discernment. The wiser preparation is not rigid expectation, but stable awareness. The soul must learn to remain present without immediately grasping, obeying, fleeing, or condemning. It must be capable of meeting beauty without surrendering intelligence and meeting terror without surrendering itself. This capacity cannot be improvised at death. It is cultivated now. Every time we react compulsively, we rehearse captivity. Every time we observe reaction without becoming it, we rehearse freedom. Every time we hand authority to fear, shame, craving, or praise, we strengthen the forces that may later appear as rulers. Every time we enter stillness and remain awake, we discover a region of consciousness that does not need immediate instruction. Death may magnify what life has practiced. The witness at the edge. Beneath the changing contents of experience, there is a simple fact often overlooked. Something knows that experience is occurring. A thought appears, and it is known. Fear moves through the body, and it is known. A memory rises, and it is known. The face changes with age, yet change is recognized. This knowing presence is not easily captured because the mind turns everything into an object. It can describe thoughts, sensations, and identities, but the one to whom they appear cannot be placed before awareness in the same way. The witness is not necessarily a separate little observer hidden inside the skull. That image creates another object. It is better understood as the capacity of consciousness to illuminate experience. The Gnostic idea of the divine spark points towards something deeper than ordinary witnessing, but the witness can become an entrance. It reveals that consciousness is not identical with every movement passing through it. The body says, "I am afraid." The witness knows fear. The mind says, "I am dying." The witness knows the thought. At the final threshold, this distinction may become everything. If awareness has never learned to recognize itself apart from thought, it may be carried by whatever thought appears. If it has never observed fear without obedience, fear may become the first authority. If it has never allowed identity to loosen, the loss of the body may feel like total destruction. But if the witness has been cultivated, death may reveal continuity beneath collapse. Not the continuity of personality exactly, not the guarantee that every memory remains. A more elemental continuity, awareness before the story it carries. This is not a belief to repeat, it must be tasted. In meditation, grief, awe, exhaustion, or profound silence, there may come a moment when the usual self becomes transparent. Thought continues at the edges, but it no longer occupies the throne. The body remains, Yet identity is not confined to its tension. There is simply presence, clear, unadorned, needing no name. Such moments are brief for most people, but they reveal a possibility. The self may not be the center around which consciousness revolves. The self may be an event appearing within consciousness. Death ends the event called this life. What happens to the field in which it appeared remains the great question. When the world releases its claim, the moment the body ends is not merely an ending. It is the removal of a claim. The world has claimed the body through gravity, hunger, law, obligation, affection, labor, injury, identity, and time. It has said, "You belong to this family, this nation, this history, this face, this pain, this place in the sequence of events." Death loosens every worldly contract. Possessions remain behind. Titles lose authority. Reputation becomes memory in other minds. The body can no longer be threatened with exclusion, hunger, pain, or social disgrace. The mechanisms through which the world controlled behavior are suddenly powerless. Yet inward contracts may continue. The person may still believe they owe suffering. They may still believe authority must be obeyed. They may still believe love requires return. They may still believe identity depends upon the name. The body's contracts end automatically. The soul's contracts may require recognition. This is where the true work of death begins, not in defeating a cosmic enemy, not in rejecting light merely because it shines, not in clinging to a doctrine as though memorized words can replace awakened consciousness. The work begins in seeing what remains active after the world can no longer enforce it. What does fear command when there is no body to protect? What does guilt demand when no earthly court remains? What does desire pursue when there are no hands to grasp? What does identity become when no one calls the name? These questions lead us beyond the biological moment of death and into the architecture of the one who dies. Before we can understand heavens, rulers, gates, reincarnation or liberation, we must examine the consciousness approaching them. The body ends, but does the false self end with it? Does wisdom suddenly appear because the brain has fallen silent? Does the soul become free merely because its cage has changed form? The next chapter begins with the assumption that many spiritual systems prefer not to question. Death may reveal more than life allows us to see. But revelation is not the same as awakening, and the opening of the gate does not guarantee that the soul knows how to cross. Chapter 2. Death does not guarantee awakening. There is a comforting idea buried beneath many religious and spiritual traditions, that death corrects what life could not. The confused become clear, the frightened become peaceful, the selfish become wise. The dead awaken into a truth so obvious and overwhelming that every illusion simply falls away. It is an understandable hope. The living watch people spend entire lives imprisoned by fear, addiction, pride, resentment, obedience, and self-deception. We see intelligence serve denial. We see tenderness buried beneath defenses. We see human beings cling to beliefs that wound them because those beliefs are familiar. It is tempting to imagine that death tears through all of this at once. The body ends, the mask falls, the soul remembers. But why should the collapse of the body automatically produce wisdom? A door can open without teaching the one who enters how to see. A veil can fall while deeper forms of blindness remain. The removal of one limitation does not guarantee freedom from every other limitation. Death may reveal more than embodied consciousness could perceive. It may expose hidden dimensions of memory, relationship, causation, and identity. Yet revelation alone does not equal awakening. A person can be shown the truth and still resist it. A soul can encounter vastness and interpret it through fear. An authority can appear luminous and be obeyed before it is understood. What crosses the threshold may still carry the structure of the one who approached it. This is the problem. The body dies in a moment. Conditioning rarely does. The fantasy of automatic liberation. The belief that death automatically liberates consciousness often rests upon an unexamined assumption that the body is the sole source of confusion. If the body creates fear, then death must end fear. If the brain creates illusion, then the end of the brain must reveal truth. If social identity traps the soul, then leaving society must free it. But even within life, we know that changing circumstances does not necessarily change consciousness. A person can leave an abusive relationship and remain governed by the abuser's voice for years. They can escape a religious institution while continuing to fear its God. They can move across the world and recreate the same emotional patterns in a different city. They can stop using a substance while the craving still organizes the mind. External departure does not guarantee inward release. The prison can continue after the walls are gone. A person may be physically free and psychologically captive. They may no longer be punished, yet continue punishing themselves. They may no longer face the authority that controlled them, yet still consult that authority internally before every decision. Why should death be exempt from this principle? The end of bodily life may remove the visible environment in which conditioning formed, but conditioning is not merely environmental. It becomes pattern. It shapes expectation, perception, interpretation, and response. It teaches consciousness what to fear, what to trust, what to worship, what to reject, and what it believes it deserves. If any continuity persists beyond death, then the continuity may include more than love and wisdom. It may include habit. It may include attachment. It may include the reflex to obey. The assumption that the soul instantly becomes enlightened at death is spiritually dangerous because it postpones transformation. It tells us there is no urgency. The difficult work can wait. Death will complete it. But if death magnifies, rather than erases what consciousness has practiced, then waiting becomes its own form of sleep. Knowledge is not awakening. A person can possess spiritual knowledge without being spiritually awake. They can describe the Archons, the Pleroma, Sophia, the Monad, the seven heavens, the divine spark, and the counterfeit spirit with impressive accuracy. They can compare scriptures, quote mystics, analyze symbols, and explain the hidden architecture of the cosmos. Yet knowledge can remain entirely inside the machinery of identity. The mind takes sacred language and builds a more elaborate self. I understand what others do not. I have escaped ordinary belief. I can see the hidden prison. I am among the awakened. The old ego is not destroyed. It is promoted. It trades social superiority for spiritual superiority. It no longer needs wealth, status, or approval in ordinary forms. It survives through secret knowledge, rare vocabulary, and the intoxicating sense of standing outside the deception that governs everyone else. This is not awakening. It is the personality wearing esoteric clothing. Death may remove the audience, but not necessarily the attachment to being special. A soul that has built identity around possessing hidden truth may continue seeking confirmation of its spiritual rank. It may be attracted to beings who flatter it, systems that assign it a cosmic mission, or visions that make it feel chosen. The content may appear exalted, while the underlying hunger remains unchanged. Knowledge becomes liberating only when it changes the structure of consciousness. Does it make the reader less reactive, less easily manipulated by fear, less dependent upon praise, more honest about hidden motives, more capable of remaining present before uncertainty, more compassionate without becoming weak, more discerning without becoming suspicious of everything? If not, the knowledge has not reached the level where death will test it. The soul does not cross the threshold carrying a library in its hands. It carries what the library became within it. The persistence of emotional gravity. Emotion is not a decorative layer placed upon consciousness. It gives direction. Fear pulls away. Desire reaches toward. Shame collapses inward. Anger pursues. Grief returns again and again to what is gone. Love can expand consciousness, but love mixed with possession clings. These forces organize experience long before conscious thought explains them. A person may understand intellectually that a relationship is over while the body continues waiting for the one who left. They may know that guilt is irrational while still living as though punishment is required. They may recognize that death is natural while feeling terror at the thought of non-existence. The mind can hold one belief while the deeper emotional structure obeys another. Death may expose this difference. The beliefs a person professed may become less important than the orientation they repeatedly embodied. Someone may have declared faith in divine love while inwardly expecting judgment. Another may have denied all spiritual reality while living with profound openness and humility. One may speak constantly of liberation while remaining unable to release control. The soul's direction may be shaped less by stated doctrine than by emotional gravity. This does not mean feelings are destiny. It means feelings reveal attachments that thought may conceal. A person who cannot forgive themselves may be drawn toward punishment, even if no divine authority demands it. A person who believes suffering purifies may consent to more suffering because pain feels spiritually meaningful. A person terrified of uncertainty may accept the first explanation offered in an unfamiliar realm. A person longing desperately to reunite with someone may follow any appearance wearing the beloved face. The danger is not emotion itself. The danger is unconscious obedience to emotion. Awakening does not require becoming cold or detached from love. It requires seeing emotional movement without allowing it to become absolute authority. The soul must learn the difference between love and compulsion, between remorse and self-condemnation, between discernment and fear, between surrender and submission. Death does not automatically teach these distinctions. Life is the classroom in which they must begin to become real. The soul may still seek a master. Many human beings are trained from childhood to look upward for permission. A parent knows, a priest knows, a teacher knows, a government knows, a sacred text knows, a spiritual guide knows, an invisible authority knows. The individual learns to distrust direct perception and wait for instruction. Even rebellion may remain organized around authority. The person rejects one master only to submit to another who speaks a different language. This pattern can become so deep that freedom feels unsafe. To stand without an external command creates anxiety. The person wonders whether they are allowed to trust their own conscience, intuition, body, or intelligence. They search for signs. They ask the universe to decide. They mistake certainty for guidance and intensity for truth. At death, this conditioning may become especially powerful. The familiar world disappears. The body no longer provides orientation. The soul, if conscious, may enter a state for which it has no ordinary reference. Under such conditions, the appearance of a powerful being could feel like rescue. The presence knows where you are. It knows what happened. It speaks with confidence. It may radiate love, authority, or overwhelming intelligence. The unprepared soul may obey before asking what kind of authority is present. This is not because the soul is foolish. It is because obedience has been rehearsed for an entire lifetime. The reflex may feel like reverence. The surrender may feel holy. The command may arrive in the language of destiny, karma, correction, duty, or love. The central question is not whether guides exist. It is whether guidance requires the abandonment of discernment. A trustworthy presence does not need to crush the soul's capacity to know. Truth does not fear examination. Love does not require terror. The highest source does not become threatened when consciousness asks for clarity. Any authority that demands immediate submission before understanding should be approached with stillness, not hostility, not panic, stillness. The soul must become capable of pausing even in the presence of magnificence. That pause may be one of the purest forms of sovereignty. The afterlife may reflect the mind. A mirror does not invent the face, but it shapes how the face is encountered. The afterlife may function in a similar way. Whatever exists beyond bodily death may be real, but consciousness may not perceive it without interpretation. The mind may translate a reality beyond form into images, beings, landscapes, voices, colors, temples, courts, relatives, or gods. This possibility does not make the experience unreal. A dream can be psychologically real, even when its landscape is symbolic. A religious vision can carry genuine insight while appearing through culturally familiar forms. A mystical state may reveal something beyond the personal mind and still be clothed in the symbols the mind can understand. The problem arises when the form is mistaken for the whole. A Christian may see Christ. A Hindu may see Yama or Krishna. A Buddhist may encounter peaceful and wrathful deities. A secular person may experience a field of light without personality. A Gnostic may interpret layered beings as rulers, eons, or guardians. The diversity of forms suggests that consciousness participates in the encounter. If so, death may not deliver a single universally recognizable scene. It may open a realm in which inner structure and external mystery interpenetrate. Fear may generate terrifying forms. Expectation may summon familiar forms. Longing may produce beloved forms. Guilt may create judicial forms. Devotion may produce sacred forms. The soul may not know immediately which elements arise from itself and which come from beyond itself. This is why awakening matters. An awakened consciousness does not merely identify images. It recognizes the movement produced by them. Does the vision contract awareness or expand it? Does it create urgency? Does it demand obedience? Does it increase clarity? Does it flatter the personality? Does it induce helplessness? Does it direct the soul back into unconscious repetition? The appearance may be impossible to verify. The effect can still be observed. A soul trained in awareness can notice what a presence awakens within it before agreeing to follow. Death can intensify confusion. There is another assumption that must be questioned, that expanded perception is always clarifying. During life, overwhelming experiences can produce the opposite. Trauma narrows attention, panic distorts perception. Sleep deprivation makes ordinary stimuli strange. Psychedelic states can reveal profound beauty, but they can also intensify fear, projection, and grandiosity. A person exposed to more information than the nervous system can organize may become less discerning, not more. If death opens consciousness beyond the body's filters, the expansion could be immense. What would it mean to encounter memory without sequence? To feel the emotions of others directly? To perceive multiple realities at once? To exist without the familiar center created by the body? To experience a presence of extraordinary scale? Such expansion may be liberating for a prepared consciousness. For an unprepared one, it may be overwhelming. The soul may reach for the first structure that restores orientation. A doctrine, a guide, a command, a familiar face, a promise of return. Confusion can make authority attractive. The more disoriented consciousness becomes, the more willing it may be to surrender its freedom in exchange for explanation. This is true in life. It may remain true beyond it. Human institutions have always understood that frightened people seek certainty. Spiritual deception, whether psychological or metaphysical, would likely exploit the same principle. Create urgency. Define the danger. Offer the solution. Demand consent. A soul that cannot tolerate uncertainty may accept the arrangement before it sees the cost. This is why death preparation requires more than positive belief. It requires the capacity to remain aware inside, not knowing. The life review is not the same as judgment reports of life review often describe a panoramic encounter with the life just lived. Events return with unusual vividness. The individual may experience not only personal actions, but their emotional effects upon others. A careless word is felt from both sides. A hidden kindness reveals consequences the giver never witnessed. The moral structure of life becomes immediate rather than theoretical. Such an experience could be profoundly awakening. It could dissolve denial. It could reveal the unity between lives. It could show that nothing occurs in isolation. But the life review may also awaken guilt with devastating force. The personality sees harm it cannot undo. It feels the suffering caused by ignorance, fear, selfishness, or cruelty. Without discernment, revelation becomes condemnation. I must be punished. I am unworthy of freedom. I have failed. I deserve to return. I must repair everything before I can rest. These conclusions may arise internally, even if no being imposes them. Guilt can become its own Archon. It stands at the gate and says, liberation must be earned through more suffering. This is why awakening requires learning the difference between responsibility and self-hatred. Responsibility sees clearly. It does not minimize harm. It does not invent excuses. It does not turn ignorance into innocence. But responsibility remains oriented toward truth and transformation. Shame, by contrast, turns an action into identity. I caused harm becomes, I am irredeemable. I acted unconsciously becomes, I deserve captivity. The distinction is not sentimental. It may determine how consciousness responds to the life review. A soul able to face truth without fleeing and without condemning itself may transform memory into wisdom. A soul trained to believe guilt requires punishment may build its own return path. Death does not automatically teach mercy. Mercy must become part of consciousness before judgment arrives. Spiritual belief can survive as architecture beliefs are often treated as ideas stored in the mind. They are more than that. Repeated beliefs become architecture. They determine what appears possible, what feels dangerous, and what is interpreted as sacred. A belief can shape the emotional response before conscious analysis begins. A person taught that God is wrathful may feel fear in the presence of light. A person taught that obedience is holiness may experience command as love. A person convinced that humanity is trapped in a hostile simulation may interpret every luminous being as an enemy. A person certain that deceased relatives will guide them may trust any familiar appearance without hesitation. The afterlife, if it is responsive to consciousness, may meet each soul through the architecture it has built. This does not mean belief creates all reality. It means belief influences the doorway through which reality is encountered. A cathedral and a prison can be made from the same stone. Arrangement changes experience. The beliefs carried into death may arrange the unknown before the soul recognizes what it is seeing. This gives spiritual formation enormous importance. What kind of inner world are we constructing? One governed by terror, one dependent upon external rescue, one suspicious of all beauty, one hungry for spiritual importance, one capable of humility, courage, and stillness. Every belief should be examined not only for whether it sounds true, but for what kind of consciousness it produces. A doctrine that claims liberation while making the reader more fearful may be building the very prison it warns against. A teaching that encourages obedience without discernment may prepare the soul for submission. A philosophy that inflates spiritual identity may create vulnerability to flattery. The fruits matter. The soul may eventually live inside them. The dead may remain themselves for a time. If personal consciousness continues after death, it may not dissolve immediately into pure spirit. The person may remain recognizable. Memories may persist. Emotional bonds may continue. Preferences, confusion, and concern may not disappear at once. This possibility appears across traditions and reports of contact with the dead. The deceased are often described not as perfected beings, but as themselves, sometimes peaceful, sometimes bewildered, sometimes attached, sometimes changed. That continuity would make sense. The personality was formed over decades. It may not vanish merely because the body stops. It could remain as a temporary organization of memory and identity, gradually loosening as the soul enters a deeper condition. If so, death is not a magical promotion. An angry person may remain angry. A controlling person may still attempt control. A frightened person may seek protection. A loving person may remain concerned for those left behind. This should not be used to frighten the grieving. It should deepen compassion. The dead may need release as much as the living do. A person who spent life clinging may not immediately know how to let go. A person who denied death may struggle to accept what occurred. A person whose identity depended entirely upon a role may feel disoriented without it. The soul's condition after death may reflect the degree to which it learned to exist without constant confirmation from the world. This gives ordinary practices of surrender profound significance. Letting go of control, allowing another person to change, forgiving what cannot be repaired, releasing a role that has ended, accepting the aging body, sitting in silence without needing to become someone. These are not minor acts. They teach consciousness how to continue when familiar structures fall away. Awakening is a capacity, not an event. People often imagine awakening as a dramatic moment, a vision, a revelation, a sudden recognition of unity, an experience of light, a collapse of identity. Such moments can transform a life, but they do not guarantee permanent freedom. The personality can absorb the experience and build identity around it. The revelation becomes a story repeated for years. The person protects the memory while losing the state of consciousness that made it possible. Awakening is not merely what is seen. It is the capacity to remain free in relation to what appears. Can consciousness encounter fear without becoming fear? Can it encounter pleasure without becoming craving? Can it encounter authority without surrendering discernment? Can it encounter mystery without forcing certainty? Can it encounter guilt without demanding punishment? Can it encounter beauty without worshipping the form? This capacity must be practiced across changing conditions. If awakening depends upon a meditation room, a teacher, a ritual, a substance, a community, or a particular emotional state, then it remains conditional. Death removes conditions. What remains must stand without support. This does not mean the soul faces death alone in an absolute sense. Help may exist. Love may surround the crossing. Guides, ancestors, or compassionate intelligences may be present. But no guide can awaken on behalf of another consciousness. Assistance can point. It cannot see for us. A door can be opened. It cannot release the attachment that refuses to cross. Awakening is the soul's capacity to recognize truth directly enough that fear, appearance, and authority cannot fully replace it. Death may reveal the need for this capacity. It does not guarantee its arrival. The difference between expansion and liberation. A person can experience expanded consciousness without being liberated. They may see luminous patterns, leave the body, hear voices, receive visions, or feel connected to cosmic intelligence. These experiences can be meaningful. They can also become addictive. The personality begins chasing states. Ordinary life feels dull. Stillness is rejected unless it produces spectacle. The seeker becomes dependent upon intensity and mistakes intensity for depth. Death may produce the greatest intensity consciousness has ever known. If the soul has learned to equate overwhelming experience with truth, it may surrender immediately to whatever appears most powerful. But power is not the same as ultimacy. A storm is powerful. Fear is powerful. Desire is powerful. A ruler may be powerful without being divine. Liberation is not proven by magnitude. It is revealed through freedom. Does the experience leave consciousness more capable of seeing? Does it weaken compulsion? Does it dissolve false identity? Does it deepen compassion without creating dependency? Does it point beyond itself? The highest truth may not be the most dramatic appearance. It may be the silence in which every appearance is seen. The soul must learn not to be seduced by scale. What we practice becomes the path. No one knows the exact sequence of death, but we know how habits work. Repeated action becomes easier. Repeated thought becomes believable. Repeated emotion becomes familiar. Repeated surrender becomes character. The path followed at death may be shaped by what consciousness practiced in life. If we constantly flee discomfort, we rehearse flight. If we obey every fearful thought, we rehearse submission. If we demand certainty before acting, we rehearse dependence. If we turn guilt into self-punishment, we rehearse captivity. If we observe fear, question authority, release attachment, and return to stillness, we rehearse sovereignty. This is not about earning a favorable afterlife. It is about becoming capable of meeting whatever arises. The preparation is not a collection of magical instructions. It is a transformation of reflex. At the threshold, there may be no time to consult a doctrine. The soul will respond from what has become natural. A musician does not create fluency by reading about scales during the performance. The body remembers what was practiced. Consciousness may work the same way. The final crossing may reveal the deepest rehearsal of a lifetime. The most dangerous spiritual assumption. The most dangerous assumption is not that death ends everything. It is that death will save us from the work we refuse to do. This belief allows resentment to remain. It allows fear to rule. It allows external authority to replace inner knowing. It allows the false self to survive behind spiritual language. It imagines that the gate itself will provide the consciousness required to cross it. But gates do not awaken travelers. They reveal them. Death may show the soul what it has become beneath the distractions of the body. It may strip away social performance, possession, reputation, and physical control. What remains may be luminous. It may also be confused, attached, frightened, or hungry for instruction. This is not a sentence of doom. It is a call to seriousness. Everything unresolved can be approached now. Fear can be witnessed now. Guilt can be transformed now. False authority can be questioned now. Attachment can be softened now. Stillness can be entered now. The divine spark can be remembered now. The work of liberation does not begin after death. It becomes visible there. The first requirement of the soul. If death does not guarantee awakening, then what does the soul need? Not certainty. Certainty can become another prison. Not suspicion. Suspicion binds attention to fear, not spiritual ambition. Ambition turns liberation into achievement. The first requirement is honesty, to see what governs consciousness without disguise. What voice receives immediate obedience? What fear remains unquestioned? What loss feels impossible to release? What authority is mistaken for God? What image of the self must be protected? What punishment is secretly believed to be deserved? These questions are not accusations. They are openings. The soul becomes less vulnerable each time an unconscious force is brought into awareness. What is seen clearly loses some of its power to impersonate the self. This is the beginning of awakening. Not a vision, not a title, not a belief about being spiritually advanced. A simple movement from unconscious obedience into conscious relationship. The force may still arise. Fear may still speak. Guilt may still tighten the chest. Desire may still pull. But awareness is no longer entirely inside the command. A small distance appears. Within that distance, choice becomes possible. Within choice, sovereignty begins. And within sovereignty, the soul discovers that awakening is not something death gives. It is something consciousness learns to stop abandoning. The body may end in a single moment. The patterns that governed it may continue. To understand those patterns, we must now turn toward the identity that assumes it will die. The name, the history, the face, the wounded and defended personality, the person we have mistaken for the whole of ourselves. Before asking what survives death, we must ask a more immediate question. Who exactly believes they are dying? Chapter 3. The person you think is dying. The person who fears death is not a single seamless being. It is a gathering, a body carrying ancient instincts, a name received from others, a personality shaped through praise and injury, a history edited by memory, a collection of roles performed so often that performance began to feel like essence, a wounded child hidden beneath adult competence, a spiritual identity built from everything the mind has learned to call awakening. All of these speak in the first person. I am afraid. I am dying. I must survive. I cannot let go. Yet the voice saying I does not always belong to the same layer of consciousness. At one moment the body speaks through pain. At another, fear speaks through imagination. Shame repeats the verdict of someone long gone. Desire claims that life will become complete after one more achievement, one more reconciliation, one more chance. The social self worries about how it will be remembered. The spiritual self hopes death will confirm that it understood what others did not. Each voice presents itself as the whole. This is why the question of death cannot be separated from the question of identity. Before asking what survives the body, we must ask what we have mistaken for ourselves. The answer is not found by choosing one preferred identity and declaring the rest false. The personality is not an enemy to be destroyed. The body is not an obstacle to be despised. Memory is not worthless merely because it changes. Every layer has carried something necessary. The problem begins when a temporary structure claims ultimacy. The mask becomes dangerous only when it forgets it is a mask. The self built for survival. Long before a child develops a philosophy, the world begins teaching the child how to remain connected to others. Certain expressions receive warmth. Others produce distance. Some emotions are welcomed. Others disturb the family system. Curiosity may be encouraged or punished. Anger may be forbidden. Sensitivity may be mocked. Obedience may be rewarded so consistently that the child learns to confuse compliance with goodness. These lessons are rarely delivered as formal instruction. They enter through faces, silences, tones of voice, withdrawal, approval, tension, and repetition. The child studies the emotional weather. What makes the room safe? What causes affection to disappear? What part of me must become quieter? What must I become to remain loved? Survival does not refer only to food and shelter. For the developing nervous system, connection is survival. A child cannot calmly decide that a parent's limitations are not personal. The child adapts. It becomes more useful, more invisible, more entertaining, more controlled, more impressive, or less emotionally demanding. These adaptations form the early architecture of personality. A person praised for achievement may become incapable of resting without guilt. One raised around volatility may become exquisitely skilled at reading danger. A child required to care for adults may become someone who feels valuable only when needed. Another may learn that vulnerability invites humiliation and build a personality around invulnerability. The strategy works. That is why it survives. What begins as protection gradually becomes identity. I am responsible. I am independent. I am easygoing. I am the strong one. I am the failure. I am the difficult one. I am the one who saves everyone. The false self is not false because it contains no truth. It is false because a partial adaptation is mistaken for the whole being. A survival strategy can become so familiar that freedom feels like death. The achiever fears worthlessness without achievement. The caretaker fears abandonment without usefulness. The controller fears collapse without control. The invisible person fears exposure. The spiritual seeker fears ordinariness. When bodily death approaches, these structures may tighten because the condition they were designed to prevent has finally arrived. Total loss of control. The personality cannot negotiate with death. It cannot perform well enough to avoid it. It cannot become useful enough to remain. It cannot read the room and adapt its way out. The oldest strategy reaches the edge of its power. What the personality calls terror may partly be the recognition that its entire method of survival no longer applies. The social person. Every human being exists inside a web of recognition. We know ourselves partly through the eyes of others. Family gives us one identity. Work gives us another. Friendship, community, religion, nationality, class, reputation, and appearance create additional versions. The person at home may not be the person at work. The voice used with a parent may differ from the voice used with a child. Confidence may vanish in the presence of one particular authority. Humor may appear only around those who make the nervous system feel safe. A person can seem generous in public and remain emotionally withholding in private. Another can appear reserved socially while possessing a vast inward life. None of these versions is necessarily fraudulent. Human identity is relational. Different parts emerge in different conditions, but the social self depends upon witnesses. It requires other minds to confirm its position. A title exists because a system recognizes it. Prestige exists because others agree to value it. Embarrassment exists because an imagined audience is present. Even rebellion often depends upon the world being available to reject. Death removes the audience. The reputation remains among the living, but the dead can no longer manage it. Praise and criticism may continue, yet the body no longer responds. The carefully constructed image becomes a story circulating in other minds. This can be difficult to contemplate because much of life is spent protecting an identity that cannot cross intact. The polished professional, the devoted parent, the spiritual teacher, the misunderstood outsider, the wounded survivor, the successful creator, the person everyone depends upon. These roles may contain great beauty. They may express genuine love, talent, courage, and service. But they are conditions of embodiment. They are ways consciousness participated in a particular life. They are not the whole of consciousness. A soul that cannot distinguish essence from role may feel stripped when the role ends. The parent may still reach toward children who must continue without them. The leader may seek followers. The admired person may long for recognition. The victim may cling to injury because suffering provided the most stable identity available. The social person fears not only death, but disappearance from the minds of others. Will they remember me? Will they understand me? Will my work survive? Will anyone know what I endured? These questions reveal the hunger to remain reflected. There is nothing shameful in wanting to be remembered. Memory is one of the ways love continues. But remembrance by others cannot provide ultimate continuity. Every human memory fades, stories change, names disappear, even monuments become fragments. If the soul depends upon being remembered, time becomes another form of death. The deeper identity must be capable of existing without applause, accusation, recognition, or narrative preservation. Otherwise, the soul remains tethered to the theatre after the performance has ended. The body self. The body is the most immediate identity because it is always present. We do not merely possess sensations, we organize the world around them. Here is where pain occurs. Here is where pleasure arrives. Here is the boundary between the self and everything else. The body gives location to consciousness. I am here. The voice seems to come from here. Vision opens from here. The world approaches this face, these hands, this vulnerable arrangement of flesh. Even spiritual teachings are received through a nervous system with particular histories and limits. Because embodiment is so intimate, the idea of existing without the body can feel incoherent. What would it mean to be conscious without a center? Without eyes, from where would one see? Without ears, how would anything be heard? Without skin, where would the self end? These questions expose how deeply awareness has been trained to interpret itself through physical form. The body self is not merely anatomical. It includes the felt image of the body, attractive or unattractive, strong or weak, healthy or damaged, male or female, young or aging, desired or ignored. Society adds judgment to biology until the body becomes a public statement. People spend entire lives negotiating the meaning of their appearance. A face becomes a source of power or shame. Weight becomes morality. Age becomes failure. Illness becomes betrayal. The body may be disciplined, displayed, hidden, decorated, punished, perfected, or abandoned. Even the desire to transcend it may conceal disgust. At death, the physical image is surrendered. The face no longer functions as identity. The body cannot be improved, defended, or compared. Its beauty and its wounds enter the same stillness. This surrender may be terrifying to the consciousness that has known no other center. Yet the body has never been as fixed as it appears. It has changed continuously. The body of childhood is gone. The cells, proportions, chemistry, strength, and features have altered. The face now seen in the mirror would have been unrecognizable to the infant, yet the sense of continuity remained. If identity survived every bodily change during life, perhaps identity was never located entirely in the body. But this insight should not be used to dismiss embodiment. The body is where the work of identity becomes visible. Fear appears in the chest. Shame lowers the eyes. Anger enters the jaw. Grief alters breath. The body preserves what the conscious mind claims to have forgotten. It is both veil and archive. To prepare for death is not to flee the body prematurely. It is to inhabit it fully enough that the soul no longer needs to use unconscious tension as a hiding place. A person cannot release what they refuse to feel. The body teaches the soul where the unfinished life remains. The narrative self-memory creates the impression of a continuous person. The mind gathers events and arranges them into a story. Some moments become central, others disappear. Certain injuries are revisited until they define the meaning of everything that followed. Achievements are used as evidence of worth. Failures become prophecies. The story answers the question, who are you? I am the one who was abandoned. I am the one who survived. I am the one who never fit. I am the one who became successful despite everything. I am the one who lost the person I loved. I am the one who awakened. These narratives bring coherence to complexity. Without them, life could feel like disconnected experience. But the story is not neutral. It selects. Memory is not a perfect archive. It is reconstructed each time it is recalled. Emotion emphasizes some details and erases others. Later understanding changes earlier events. The person remembering at 50 is not the person who experienced the event at 10, yet the two are fused inside the sentence, "This happened to me." A life story may be true without being complete. The danger appears when the narrative becomes fate. A person wounded early may interpret every later conflict through abandonment. Someone who succeeded through vigilance may treat relaxation as danger. Another who endured humiliation may organize life around proving superiority. The story protects its own continuity. It recruits evidence. It resists whatever cannot be integrated. Death may interrupt this narrative more radically than any event in life. The story reaches its final page, but awareness may remain. If consciousness continues, the biography becomes a completed object. The person can no longer revise the future to change its meaning. No new achievement will repair the old wound. No later conversation will redeem the failure. The story must be seen as it is. This can be devastating. It can also be liberating. The soul may discover that the life was real without being ultimate. Every joy and wound belonged to the journey, but none contained the totality of the traveler. The narrative self says, "I am what happened." The deeper witness says, "What happened appeared within me." That difference is subtle while life is moving. At death, it may become immense. The wounded self pain has a way of becoming identity because it demands attention. A wound that is not acknowledged continues speaking. It shapes relationships, choices, expectations, and defenses. The person may build an entire life around avoiding the original feeling. The abandoned child becomes the adult who leaves first. The humiliated child becomes the adult who must dominate. The unseen child becomes the performer. The controlled child becomes the rebel who cannot tolerate any boundary. The betrayed person becomes someone who tests every bond until it breaks. These patterns are not signs of moral failure. They are attempts to prevent old pain from returning. But prevention can become repetition. The defended self recreates the very conditions it fears because it cannot imagine relationship outside the wound's logic. This wounded identity often fears death intensely, though not always because it loves life. Sometimes it fears that the story will end without justice. No one will finally understand. The apology will never come. The wrong will never be acknowledged. The person who caused the harm may die without consequence. The wounded self wants the universe to finish the trial. Religious images of judgment can become attractive because they promise that hidden suffering will be seen. The soul imagines an ultimate court where every betrayal is exposed and every offender confronted. The desire for justice is not wrong. But if identity depends upon remaining wounded, justice itself can become threatening. Healing would require the self to exist without the injury that organized its world. This is one of the strangest attachments consciousness can carry, loyalty to pain. The wound becomes proof that the life mattered. It preserves connection to the person who caused it. It explains failure. It grants moral position. It becomes the central altar of the personality. Death may not dissolve this altar automatically. A soul still organized around grievance may remain magnetized to the life in which the grievance occurred. It may seek return, confrontation, vindication, or another opportunity to reverse the roles. This is how unresolved pain can resemble fate, not because a cosmic judge forces repetition, but because consciousness continues circling the scene it cannot release. Healing does not mean declaring the harm acceptable. It means ending the wound's authority to define being. The soul must become larger than what happened to it. Otherwise, the wound may follow even when the body that carried it is gone. The moral self. Most people carry an internal image of who they should be. Good, loyal, strong, selfless, pure, productive, forgiving, spiritually evolved. This moral identity is shaped by family, religion, culture, and personal aspiration. It can inspire genuine integrity. It can also become a cruel instrument. The moral self compares reality with an ideal and issues judgment. I should not feel this. I should have known better. I should be further along. I should forgive. I should not fear death. A person can become divided between lived experience and the image they believe they must maintain. Anger is denied because a good person is not angry. Desire is hidden because a spiritual person should be beyond it. Exhaustion is ignored because a loving person always gives more. The rejected feeling does not disappear. It goes underground. There it becomes shadow. The personality presents goodness while the unacknowledged self accumulates resentment. envy, fear, and hunger. The more rigid the ideal, the more powerful the concealed opposite may become. Death threatens the moral self because death removes the possibility of further improvement. What if the person never became who they were supposed to be? What if the final state contains contradiction? What if cruelty and tenderness, courage and cowardice, wisdom and blindness all belong to the same life? The moral self wants a clean verdict, good or bad, saved or condemned, awakened or asleep. But a human life rarely fits one word. The life review, if it occurs, may reveal this complexity without allowing the usual defenses. Harm can be seen clearly alongside love. Cowardice may stand beside sacrifice. A person may discover that their greatest kindness caused unintended pain, and their greatest failure awakened compassion in another. The soul must be able to meet moral truth without reducing itself to a verdict. Otherwise, it may seek an external judge to resolve the unbearable ambiguity. The highest form of responsibility does not require a perfect self-image. It requires the courage to see the whole. The spiritual self. Spiritual identity is among the most difficult identities to recognize because it forms around the desire for liberation. The seeker begins sincerely. They meditate, study, pray, question inherited beliefs, confront wounds, and experience moments of profound clarity. Their life changes. The old identity loosens. Then the mind builds a new center from the transformation. I am conscious. I am chosen. I understand the hidden structure. I am no longer like ordinary people. I have escaped the matrix. The language changes, but the need to be someone remains. The spiritual self can become more defended than the ordinary personality because criticism now feels like an attack upon truth itself. Disagreement is interpreted as unconsciousness. Doubt becomes spiritual weakness. The seeker no longer merely has beliefs. They become the protector of revelation. This identity is especially vulnerable to esoteric systems promising secret rank. The person is told they belong to a rare group of advanced souls, star beings, divine messengers, or awakened ones who incarnated with a special mission. Such stories may contain symbolic truth, but they also satisfy the personality's hunger to be exceptional. At death, this hunger may become a point of influence. A presence need only confirm the identity. You were chosen. You have completed a great initiation. You are needed for another mission. You must return to guide others. The spiritual self may consent eagerly because the invitation preserves its importance. Even liberation can become ambition. The soul imagines ascent as promotion through cosmic ranks. It seeks entry into superior realms, recognition by higher beings, or proof of greater purity. The heavens become another hierarchy in which the personality hopes to succeed. Gnostic language can be misused in exactly this way. The pleroma becomes an elite destination. The Archons become enemies, proving the seeker's importance. The divine spark becomes evidence of superiority rather than shared origin. But the true divine spark does not make one person more real than another. It does not require status. It does not compete. It does not announce itself through grandiosity. It is closest to what remains when the need to be spiritually special falls silent. This may be why genuine awakening often feels less like becoming extraordinary and more like becoming transparent. The self no longer needs to stand between reality and awareness. The one who wants to continue. When people imagine survival after death, they often imagine the continuation of the familiar personality, the same preferences, the same relationships, the same humor, the same sense of being this particular person. Heaven becomes an improved version of life, free from illness and loss, but preserving the identity that enjoyed, loved, feared, and remembered. This desire is understandable. We do not merely want consciousness to continue. We want our consciousness to continue in recognizable form. The thought that awareness might survive while personality dissolves can feel almost as frightening as annihilation. What comfort is there in continuation if the one who continues no longer remembers this life? What does immortality mean if the name disappears? The personality wants eternity as itself. Yet the personality is made from conditions that cannot remain unchanged. It is shaped by this body, language, history, culture, family, and era. Remove all conditions, and what happens to the self they produced? Perhaps some continuity remains. Perhaps memory persists for a time. Perhaps individuality is not erased, but transformed. No one living can claim certainty. But the demand that the personality continue exactly as it is reveals an attachment to form. The soul may be larger than the person, yet the person fears being outgrown. This is similar to the child who cannot imagine becoming an adult without losing existence. The adult does not destroy the child entirely. The child remains as memory, pattern, tenderness, and wound. But the form of identity changes beyond what the child could comprehend. Death may be a transformation of greater magnitude. The personality could remain within the soul as a completed expression without remaining the ruler of consciousness. A note does not cease to matter when the music continues beyond it. Its individuality belonged to the composition. The fear of personality dissolution comes partly from imagining that meaning requires permanence. But many of the most beautiful things are meaningful precisely because they are unrepeatable. A life can be sacred without lasting forever in its present form. The self as a house of voices. If we listen carefully, identity reveals itself as a house occupied by many voices. The frightened child, the protective adult, the inner judge, the performer, the caretaker, the rebel, the believer, the skeptic, the body, the witness. Each speaks under different conditions. A criticism awakens one voice. Intimacy awakens another. Success produces confidence, while a familiar humiliation can make decades of growth disappear in a moment. The person says, "I do not know what came over me," because a hidden part temporarily occupied the whole house. The Gnostic image of inner rulers becomes psychologically meaningful here. A thought does not need to be metaphysically external to behave like an authority. The inner judge commands, fear threatens, craving promises, shame accuses, pride flatters. These forces speak as though they own the self. Most people do not choose which voice appears. The voice emerges, and identification follows. I am angry. I am worthless. I need this. I know the truth. Awareness fuses with the passing state. This fusion is the basic mechanism of captivity. The goal is not to silence every inner voice. That would become another form of violence. The goal is to recognize that no voice alone is the totality of consciousness. Fear can speak without becoming the king. Shame can appear without becoming the judge. Desire can move without becoming destiny. The ability to hold multiple voices in awareness without immediate obedience is preparation for death. Whatever appears beyond the body may also speak. A memory, a guide, a judge, a beloved face, a command, a promise. If consciousness has never learned to distinguish presence from authority, every voice may feel absolute. The inner work of life becomes the discernment of the threshold. The self that others carry. Part of every person continues in the memories of others. A phrase becomes someone else's inner voice. A kindness changes a life that later changes another. A wound is passed forward. A habit enters a family. A story becomes ancestry. We live inside one another more deeply than individual identity admits. The parent's fear can become the child's caution. The teacher's encouragement can become the student's courage decades later. The cruelty of one person can shape relationships they will never witness. The dead continue socially and psychologically because consequences survive them. This form of continuation does not require metaphysical belief. but it complicates the idea that the self is contained inside one body. A person is partly the web of effects they create. The life review may reveal this web. What felt private may turn out to have entered many lives. A moment of patience may have prevented a wound. An act of contempt may have echoed through a family. The soul may see itself not as an isolated biography, but as a movement through countless others. This could be one meaning of judgment, not a divine authority issuing a sentence, but consciousness encountering the full relational truth of what it became. The false self imagines it acts alone. The deeper soul discovers that nothing is entirely private. Every life enters the field. The witness behind the person. Beneath the assembled identity, there remains the difficult question of awareness itself. Who notices the voices? Who recognizes bodily change? Who remembers the child from the perspective of the adult? Who knows that one identity has replaced another? The witness cannot be reduced easily to any of the contents it observes. It is not the fear, because fear can be noticed. It is not the story, because the story can be revised. It is not the body image, because the body image changes. It is not the spiritual identity, because spiritual identity can also be seen. This does not prove an immortal soul, but it opens a space the personality cannot entirely occupy. In moments of deep attention, the witness may feel less personal than expected. It does not possess a biography. It does not need to defend a reputation. It simply illuminates whatever appears. Pain appears, thought appears, memory appears. Even the sense of me appears. The Gnostic tradition points beyond this witnessing capacity toward the divine spark, but the witness is a doorway because it weakens total identification with the constructed person. If the self can be observed, then the observer is not identical with the self. Yet the mind quickly turns the observer into another identity. I am the witness. I am pure awareness. The subtle self claims the discovery. This is why genuine self-inquiry cannot end with a concept. Every answer must also be seen. Who is the witness? Any image that appears is witnessed. Any phrase that defines it is witnessed. Any feeling of expansion is witnessed. Eventually, thought reaches a boundary. What remains cannot be held as an object. This is not blankness. It is intimacy without description. The soul may know itself here more deeply than through any biography. The terror of losing the center. The constructed self provides stability. Even painful identity can feel safer than no identity. A person may dislike who they have become while resisting every condition that would require becoming unknown. The familiar prison offers a center. The person knows where the walls are. Spiritual transformation often produces anxiety for this reason. When a role dissolves, awareness may feel unanchored. When a belief collapses, the world appears less coherent. When a wound stops defining the person, there can be grief before freedom. Who am I without this struggle? Who am I if I no longer need to prove myself? Who am I if the person who hurt me no longer governs my inner world? Who am I without the mission? These questions anticipate death. The personality fears not merely non-existence but centerlessness. It wants a position from which to say I. Death may remove the physical and narrative center at once. The soul could interpret this openness as annihilation and rush toward any structure that restores identity. A familiar face, a former role, a promise of reincarnation, a cosmic title, a judgment that explains who it is. Even condemnation can feel safer than vastness because condemnation preserves a defined self. You are guilty still tells the soul who it is. You must return provides direction. You have a mission restores purpose. The unprepared consciousness may accept limitation simply to escape the terror of being undefined. This is why stillness is essential. Stillness allows awareness to experience existence without constant narrative confirmation. It teaches that the absence of a defined center is not necessarily emptiness. It may be openness before identity forms. The soul must learn that not knowing who it is for a moment does not mean it has ceased to exist. Identity as gravity. Every identity creates attraction. The parent is drawn toward the child. The victim is drawn toward the wound. The achiever is drawn toward another task. The believer is drawn toward confirming symbols. The condemned self is drawn toward punishment. Identity determines what feels relevant. In a crowded room, a person hears their own name. In a field of possibilities, consciousness notices what confirms its story. The same principle may operate after death. Whatever the soul believes itself to be may shape what it sees and where it moves. A person who identifies entirely as a grieving spouse may remain near the partner. One who identifies as a sinner may perceive judgment. One who identifies as spiritually chosen may encounter a mission. One who identifies as a body may remain confused near the corpse. Identity becomes gravitational. Liberation may require becoming light enough that no single identity can pull consciousness back into repetition. This does not mean abandoning love or history. It means holding them without being owned by them. The soul can love a child without believing its existence depends upon controlling the child's future. It can honor a life without needing to repeat it. It can acknowledge harm without becoming permanently identical with guilt. It can remember the personality without mistaking memory for essence. The lightness required for ascent is not moral perfection. It is reduced identification. The person is real, but not final. Calling the personality constructed does not mean it is meaningless. A song is constructed. A temple is constructed. A language is constructed. Construction does not make something unreal. It reveals that it arose through relationship, pattern, and form. The person is real as an expression. This particular life has never existed before in exactly this arrangement. Its joys, failures, humor, wounds, gifts, relationships, and choices matter. The soul did not enter embodiment merely to despise individuality. The error is not being a person. The error is believing the person is the deepest or final truth of being. A wave is real. It has shape, direction, force, and duration, but it is not separate from the sea. Its form ends without water being annihilated. The metaphor is imperfect because the soul may preserve individuality in ways a wave does not. Still, it points toward a relationship between temporary form and deeper substance. The person may be the shape consciousness took here. Death ends the shape. What remains belongs to the next mystery. A practice of honest identification. Before moving deeper into the soul, spirit, mind, and memory, it is worth asking a simple question. What do you most fear losing? The answer may reveal the identity currently closest to the center. The body, a relationship, control, memory, reputation, the unfinished work, the belief that you were right, the hope of being recognized as spiritually awakened. Sit with the answer without correcting it. Do not choose the answer that sounds wise. Notice what produces the strongest contraction. That contraction is not proof of the true self. It is evidence of attachment. Then ask, who would I be without this? Do not rush to answer. Let the mind reveal its panic, defenses, and substitutions. It may immediately construct a more acceptable identity. Without success, I would be peaceful. Without this relationship, I would be free. Without the body, I would be pure consciousness. These may be hopes, rather than direct knowing. Allow the question to remain open. The purpose is not to erase identity. It is to feel where identity has become absolute. Anything absolute will resist death as total destruction. Anything held as expression can be released with grief and reverence. The one approaching the gate. The person who approaches death is therefore many things at once. A biological organism resisting extinction, a social being leaving a web of relationships, a narrative reaching its final sentence, a wounded self longing for justice, a moral self fearing judgment, a spiritual self hoping for confirmation, a witness capable of seeing them all, perhaps a soul carrying continuity deeper than memory, perhaps a divine spark that was never born into the structures now preparing to dissolve. These layers should not be collapsed into one another. The body is not the personality. The personality is not the soul. The soul is not necessarily identical with spirit. Memory is not the whole of consciousness. The witness may be a doorway without being the final source. Without these distinctions, discussions of death become confused. People speak of the soul when they mean personality, of spirit when they mean emotion, of memory when they mean identity, and of divine consciousness when they mean an expanded psychological state. The next step is to separate these terms carefully, not to imprison mystery inside definitions, but to create a map precise enough that we do not mistake one layer for another. Because at death, the question will not simply be whether something survives. The question will be what survives, what dissolves, what witnesses the dissolution, and what was never dependent upon the body at all. The person you think is dying is real, but it may not be the deepest one present at the deathbed. Thank you for listening to this preview of The Soul Between Lives, a Gnostic guide to death, the false light, reincarnation, and the return to source. If something in this journey stirred a deeper question in you about death, memory, reincarnation, or what the soul must recognize beyond the body, then this is only the beginning. To continue with the full audiobook, please check the link below. You can also get the physical copy of the book through the link in the description. And if this resonated with you, subscribe to Awakened Soul Archives for more books, teachings, and deeper journeys into Gnostic wisdom, spiritual sovereignty, and the hidden path back to source. Until next time, remember this: death is not the final test. Recognition is.